We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 24th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
And now that the 12-day war appears to be effectively over, we have an opportunity, I think, to restart a real peace process.
The US Vice President J.D. Vance there, who appears to believe Trump's statement that a ceasefire agreement has been reached between Israel and Iran. We'll unpack that. We'll also look at Tehran's strikes on US air bases in Qatar and Iraq. And we'll cross to The Hague for the first day of the Nato Summit. We'll look at how the media is covering all of these events, and then...
Russia has capacity to make ready more than 5 million artillery shells per annum. It takes Russia 2 months to produce the annual capacity of Europe.
We'll hear about a new TNT factory in Sweden set to bolster Europe's rearmament efforts. We'll get the latest on the trade war between Cambodia and Thailand, hear from the man behind the fashion industry's soundtracks, and have a roundup of luxury market news. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. Donald Trump has announced a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, but neither country has confirmed this. This followed Iran's missile strikes on 2 US bases, one in Qatar and the other in Iraq, in retaliation for the US bombing of Iranian nuclear sites. No casualties were reported, and Qatar says its air defences intercepted the attack. Iran had warned of the strike in advance. With US troops across the Gulf on high alert, is this the extent of Iran's retaliation or just the beginning? Well, joining me now is Monocle's Middle East correspondent, Layla Malala Allen. Layla, it's great to have you back with us. Can you tell us about Trump's announcement of this ceasefire?
So this happened last night, US time, that Trump came out and he said, we have achieved this ceasefire. The 12-day war, as they're now calling it, is over. He says it will be a long-lasting ceasefire, and he doesn't imagine these two countries will ever fire against each other again. Now, that's been pretty shocking to most diplomats and analysts who were concerned this was going to go on for a very long time. There then was no confirmation from either side. And there was a couple of reasons why that seems likely. Firstly, there is no way that Iran is going to say after the US attacked it that it has agreed to a ceasefire negotiated by Iran, because Foreign Minister Abbas al-Arshi has said several times over the last week that they will no longer negotiate with the US. And the other reason, of course, is that it happened overnight Middle East time. Now, the war did continue through the night. Iran was still bombing Israel right up until 4 a.m. Iran time. 4 people in the south of Israel were injured. Now, what's happened this morning is initially Iran has said there was no confirmation of a ceasefire, but then it has said it has imposed a ceasefire upon Israel, and it does not expect to continue any more bombing unless Israel retaliates. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not said anything at all yet. The other issue here is that it does seem that Trump did not negotiate the ceasefire at all. Sky is reporting that it was actually the Emir of Qatar. Once again, Qatar, as it has done throughout this conflict across the region in the last 18 months, coming through and being really the main negotiator. It seems that Trump spoke to the Emir of Qatar last night. He said that he had got confirmation from the Israelis that they were willing to stop striking if Iran did. He then asked the Emir to go and get confirmation from the Iranians that they would do the same. And it does seem that the Emir was able to confirm that on both sides in a way that means that Iran does not say that it had to negotiate with the Americans, but Trump is able to claim that he overall negotiated this ceasefire, even though he doesn't seem to have been the guy behind the scenes, so to speak.
I mean, it's just saving face all the way around, isn't it? The announcement came on social media just before Trump is due to turn up at the Nato Summit, at which he may very well be criticised for his direct action on Iran. I wonder if he jumped the gun, so to speak, in order to deliver at The Hague.
Almost certainly. And of course, he also, particularly if he's not the guy that directly negotiated this, wants to seem responsible for this. He's also in a bit of a tricky position because, of course, last week on Thursday, he said that he was almost kind of bringing in this up to 2-week hiatus, trying to calm down the war, in which he was going to decide whether or not they would strike Iran, and then quite quickly, in just 3 days, did so. And for many people, that felt like an escalation. But it does seem clear that there have been these sort of diplomatic cables. There is a back channel open between the US and Iran, even though they don't like to talk about it. And the US did indicate to Iran that this was a one-time deal, these strikes on the nuclear sites, and they would not be repeating it. And then on the other side, Iran did warn the US that it was going to strike its base in Qatar. So, and in fact, Trump, even when he came through and he said, this strike on the base in Qatar was a very weak response from the Iranians, he did thank the Iranians for warning them in advance, which is something Iran quite often does, in order to ensure there were no casualties. And there were no casualties in that US attack, which meant nothing was escalated. Iran was able to save face by saying they had responded. They responded against the US's largest base in the Middle East. There are about 10,000 service members in that base, Al Udeid, in Qatar, but no one was hurt, which means that they don't feel the need to retaliate.
Right. So, I mean, Qatar condemned the airstrikes, briefly closed its airspace. But as you say, it seems to have been playing this role as peacekeeper. I wonder how vulnerable other US bases in the region feel. That's Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, the UAE.
Iraq and Syria, of course, as well. They initially felt extremely vulnerable. And of course, what we know is that when this war started nearly 2 weeks ago, while the US asked Netanyahu not to strike Iran during the nuclear negotiations, they were warned and they started to pull non-essential personnel from those US bases. There was a lot of concern over the last few days, of course. There was initially concern and a rumor that a base in western Iraq had also been hit. The US has confirmed that did not happen. There was no attack from Iran or Iran-backed militias in Iraq detected on that base in western Iraq. So it was just that single base in Qatar. Right now, everyone seems to be significantly calmer. Qatar is going to reopen its airspace. Qatar did issue that condemnation saying, this is a violation of our sovereign airspace. But the reality is that if they knew it was coming, the Iranians had warned that they weren't going to hit anything else at all. And also the Iranians on their military social media channels issued an apology to Qatar and said, you are our Muslim brothers. This is nothing to do with you. We are simply striking the Americans. We have absolutely no issue with you. And we really apologize for doing this on your territory. So it does seem that almost everyone is trying to de-escalate at this point. We just need to see whether Benjamin Netanyahu does the same and is willing to stop the strikes, because, of course, it was Israel that started these strikes in the first place nearly 2 weeks ago.
I mean, Iran can agree to this officially, but it might well pivot to proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, to escalate without crossing a red line. They have done this repeatedly.
That seems deeply unlikely at this stage. From the start of this conflict, Iran has not wanted this to happen. It isn't good for them. They obviously are in a very weak position in terms of having terrible air defense and a terrible air force. We already knew they had the largest ballistic missile stock in the region, but we have seen their ability to rally and continue using that. But this has been devastating for their people. This has been devastating for Tehran. It's been extremely difficult and also has shown the kind of limits of their defense capacity, given that they have no infrastructure of bunkers, sirens, things like that for their people. They have not wanted this to continue, but have felt that they need to retaliate against Israel. So there really is, right now, as long as the US does nothing further, no motivation for them to ask their militias in the region, either in Iraq or in the Houthis in Yemen, to retaliate any further. Really, actually, their big card to play was to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is absolutely vital for world trade and particularly for oil. And that was kind of, the next pivot to come. They had said that they were preparing to do that if the conflict continued. So really, that would have been a kind of economic lever rather than trying to initiate any more military levers. That seems deeply unlikely right now. This ceasefire is something they very much want.
We'll look at the Strait of Hormuz just a little bit later on in the show. So basically, you're saying this is not a regional flashpoint. It's carefully managed tit for tat.
This case, yes. What's been happening over the last 12 days, absolutely not. The problem, of course, is that these are two governments, Iran and Israel, who all they want is the complete destruction of the other government. So it's been very hard to negotiate between the two. In some ways, it does seem that the US stepping in and carrying out those limited strikes on those 3 nuclear bases, while initially a huge escalation may have been a sort of stopping point where they've said, look, Israel, we've stepped in and backed you. We've said that we agree with you striking these sites. They do seem to believe that they have stopped, at least removed the machinery that would have given Iran the possibility of creating a nuclear weapon, if not getting rid of all the enriched uranium. So it does seem that actually, for now at least, we have moved back to a situation where everyone's just trying to keep save face and look like they have been the one to complete their objectives. But as I say, we are still waiting for confirmation from Israel. And as the instigator of this particular leg of the conflict, it will be up to Netanyahu to agree and say that he's no longer going to continue striking. And whether he's willing to do that, given the quite significant damage that has been perpetrated in Israel, is another question.
Layla, thank you very much indeed. That was Layla Malala Allen, who's Monocle's Middle East correspondent. You're listening to The Globalist. The NATO summit beginning in The Hague today was meant to be a brisk stocktake on defence spending. Instead, it's been overtaken by crisis. US strikes on Iran, Trump's push for 5% military budgets, and renewed questions about NATO's direction. A draft communiqué reaffirms Article 5, the cornerstone of mutual defence. But how solid is that pledge in an age of political fragmentation? New polling from the European Council on Foreign Relations suggests a public reckoning is underway. Europeans are backing higher defence budgets, even conscription, whilst quietly preparing for a world where the US may no longer lead. Well, I'm joined now by Marion Messmer, who's a Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House. She's on the ground in The Hague, and Susie Dennison, a Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Good morning to both of you. Marion, so much has happened just over the last few hours. Does anyone actually believe the ceasefire announcement? Do US assets in the Middle East remain targets? How have these developments shifted the tone inside the NATO summit where you are now? Is the focus still budgets, or is it full-blown crisis management?
I think that really depends on who you ask, right? I mean, for the Europeans, there's a lot of nervousness around what this will mean for the summit and whether Trump will actually be fully present. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, has spent so much of his time and energy in the last few months in the lead up to the summit trying to choreograph really carefully something that the US would be happy with, something that, essentially would see Trump continuing to back NATO and showing up here in The Hague and being supportive of European NATO member states, being supportive of Ukraine. But of course, now with everything that has been going on in the Middle East over the last few days, and now the ceasefire that might be quite unstable, there's a big risk that if something happens that pulls Trump's attention away, he might end up leaving the NATO summit early, similar to what he did at a G7 meeting recently. And that would potentially send a bad signal to Russia and a bad signal about the US's ability to actually focus on NATO and be present for allies here.
Yes. Now, Susie, your new poll shows Europeans backing defence spending, which of course is what Trump wants, and even conscription. What is driving that shift? Is it the Middle East, Ukraine, the US administration, or something deeper?
Good morning. Well, I think that what the poll suggests is that Europeans are preparing for exactly the sort of eventuality that Marion has just described. US complete disengagement with NATO. What we can see, as you referred to in the introduction, is a growing level of comfort with the idea of increasing defence spending, which is strongest in the countries which feel most exposed to the conflict in Ukraine. So Poland and Denmark are the highest at 70% among those we polled. But still, it's Europe-wide, and we can see pluralities or majorities everywhere. In the UK, it was 57% in favour of increasing defence spending. And I think that this is coupled with an understanding that Trump isn't proving very good for either America or the world. So a question that we ask regularly in our public opinion polling is whether or not people think that the American political system works well or is broken. And we can see increases in all the countries we covered for the idea that the US political system is broken. Even the sort of the strongly transatlantic countries like Poland, where it remains a lower level return, you've seen it go up from 25 to 36% with the idea that the US system is broken. So I think there's this understanding that of the geopolitics of the situation and a readiness to do what is necessary on the European side because people are feeling quite scared about the international security environment that you've been describing.
And Marion, I mean, amongst the NATO leadership, I wonder if that's also the same feeling that NATO will go ahead, but increasingly the US is just not relevant to it.
I mean, I think so. That essentially really risks backfiring on Trump's strategy and on the US, right? I mean, he's already said that while it's obviously great that all the Europeans are willing to spend up to 5% of their GDP on defense, he's looking for some sort of loophole or out for the US. And that also then means that the US continues to be seen as less reliable. And I think one risk that remains to be managed is that not necessarily all states feel the same. I mean, Susie mentioned that the geographic location plays a big role. We've seen that in the run-up to the summit, Spain is one of the countries that has a hard time accepting the 5% because they also have some domestic political challenges around that. So NATO will continue to balance quite carefully what it needs to do together as one alliance and for what is acceptable for some states to have a different position on. But I think we will really see European allies focus at the summit on strengthening the industrial base to also ensure future independence from US defense companies, working on capability targets, working on investing in the capabilities that NATO desperately needs, and also continuing to support Ukraine, which is something that has become very unpopular in the US, but is of course still very much on the mind of Europeans that are closer to the war and see some of the impacts, perhaps because they're hosting Ukrainian refugees or because they're that much closer to the border.
Susie, the 27 EU foreign ministers met in Brussels yesterday. I wonder what came out of that, what we're speaking about. Are we seeing a more assertive EU or just reactive diplomacy?
I'm afraid that in the context of what is happening in the Middle East at the moment, what we're seeing from the EU is not only reactive, but is not realising the major shifts which are underway. I think the messages that we've seen coming out of some European capitals, including Germany, about the fact that what Israel has chosen to do with its attacks on Iran is in line with European security interests. It seems very out of kilter with the reality that this situation has massively destabilized a region which is very close to Europe, very close to European interests, not just security but also migration, energy, and the EU doesn't really have much leverage over that. It remains to be seen whether Trump's calculation over the weekend to engage the US within that directly will produce more results. But I think, unfortunately, we haven't seen anything from the European side which would have countered that as a possibility to be effective in another way.
Marion, Trump is, of course, on his way, and his strikes on Iran raise an interesting dichotomy. I wonder how NATO members are squaring the discomfort at the method with the relief of the outcome.
It's really difficult for NATO, I think, and it's something that potentially will have long-term implications for the alliance and for Western states generally, because something that I was thinking about is that while NATO member states and Western states generally have been calling out Russia for the illegality of its actions in Ukraine, they've been much more careful to use such language to describe the US strikes. States either haven't commented or they've backed up the United States. There are very few NATO member states that actually are on the record suggesting that maybe these strikes were illegal or that diplomacy might have been a better option. And given that there's already a lot of discourse around hypocrisy in the international system and whether Western states are essentially just picking and choosing which rules they have to adhere to, whereas they try to apply them to everyone else, that is essentially going to strengthen the Russian argument that they were also in the right in Ukraine. It's going to increase the criticism of the existing international order, which is often seen as unfair. And I also essentially worry that it's going to de facto accelerate a movement towards the kind of international order that Russia favors, which is a sort of spheres of influence system where different regions cluster around great powers. And that, of course, is not in the interest of any medium-sized or small state, as they would essentially need to accept a loss of sovereignty in such a system.
And of course, meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is quite possibly watching with glee as Zelensky's excluded from the summit table. Is NATO sending the wrong signal by doing that?
I mean, I think they are. And again, this is the sort of short-term focus on keeping Trump happy rather than focusing on the longer-term interests and strategy of the alliance. I think it's a risk that happens when you have these summits too frequently. They aren't meant to be annual in the way that they have been recently. They are meant to take place at significant moments for the alliance. And so, of course, with such a strong ongoing security threat, that's been seen as a sort of significant moment. But it also then risks, if you have this annual summit rhythm, that you end up just preparing for the summit, and it's quite tricky for European allies to balance signaling to Ukraine that they are still important, while also acknowledging that Ukraine's role in this year's summit is going to be smaller than it has been in years past, essentially to appease the United States.
Marion, thank you very much indeed. That's Marion Messmer there, Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House. We were also joined by Susie Dennison, a Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. This is The Globalist. So as NATO grapples with Trump's demands, Iran's missile strikes and the fragility of unity, there's another front opening, one with global economic stakes. Iran has threatened to block the Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows. Could that become the next flashpoint? I'm joined now by Tina Fordham, geopolitical strategist and founder of Fordham Global Foresight. Tina, just reiterate how crucial this waterway is to global supply chains.
Good morning, Georgina. Well, as you've said, the Strait of Hormuz is the major shipping route. It's between Oman and Iran, and about 20% of seaborne global oil supplies traverse that route. And of course, that's much more than Iran itself actually puts on the international market. So it's long been considered Iran's real trump card, if you will, to threaten to mine or to close the Strait of Hormuz, and by doing so, impact a price on global oil prices, a punishment.
I mean, this looked much more realistic yesterday. I wonder if this threat to close the strait is still just leverage, is real in any way, given that there has been retaliation on the US Army bases, that tit for tat is done, and a possible ceasefire.
I do think that Iran is unlikely to use that option of closing or mining the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, it has, agreed to this ceasefire. It can't really absorb the punishment that would result of this kind of thermonuclear option in global economy terms. And I think the risk of Iran doing so was always overblown. So it does periodically threaten to do so. But let's look at what the market reaction was yesterday when Iran started firing at what turns out to have been an empty U.S. base in Qatar. Oil prices started falling, and they've opened today at a low. And what that tells us is that markets have decided this conflict is over, and that by choosing that option, telegraphed quite carefully or signaled in international relation terms, Iran is telling the world that it doesn't want to extend or prolong this conflict, at least in this phase.
Tina Fordham, geopolitical strategist and founder of Fordham Global Foresight. Thank you very much indeed. Now, still to come on the programme.
I would say that most people I work with, that's when it's the best, because it's when you share ideas, when you share things.
We'll hear from the man who provides soundtracks to all of the big fashion shows. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
It's 9:25 in Moscow, 7:25 here in London. This is The Globalist with me, Georgina Godwin. And joining me in the studio now is Claudine Fry, who's a partner at Control Risk. Good morning to you, Claudine.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming in to have a look at today's newspapers. And if we start for a moment sort of digitally, because there's so much rolling news that the papers just simply haven't caught up with.
That's right. It's pretty hard to avoid Iran in the papers absolutely everywhere. The ceasefire is clearly dominant, and that's even for the countries over in the Far East, for whom the news is older, so far as the papers are concerned. And most papers around the world are running with the story as a live news feed still, actually. Everybody's waiting to hear the official line from Israel on the ceasefire. Quite an interesting perspective in the Japan Times. There was a piece observing the fact that perhaps Trump is going to be another US president who ends up being distracted from the Asia-Pacific region, despite signs early on in his second presidency that region would indeed be a priority for him. And the Japan Times running the Bloomberg piece, actually, which is, I think, notable in its wording about the status of the ceasefire. It indicates that Iran and Israel may be nearing a pause, which I think sums up the sense that everybody has of uncertainty around the true status of the ceasefire that Trump announced.
I mean, but it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, that a head of a state should make an announcement and the whole world goes, nah, we don't really believe you.
Exactly. What a sign of the times. That's absolutely right. And I think everybody's not only uncertain about the status of the ceasefire that Trump's referred to, but also, of course, about the impact of the strikes on the nuclear facilities in Iran. All the different newspapers that I've checked today have been reminding us of the need for caution around drawing conclusions about what has actually been achieved so far.
Now, we were hearing from Tina Fordham earlier. She was talking about the markets and how they were reacting in terms of the possible closure of the Straits of Hormuz and actually how the markets are kind of deciding things. Well, in the Congo, they are too. And this has to do with cobalt prices. This is a piece in the Financial Times.
Yeah, that's right. This is a piece about cobalt prices. Cobalt, absolutely critical mineral, derivative of copper, and one that we are probably all carrying around in our electronic devices all the time. And there are very few countries that supply this critical mineral. One of them is the Democratic Republic of Congo. And like other countries that have critical minerals, the DRC is drawing on its strategic influence to try and control prices, to try and protect its strategic position, and has actually had a ban on exports of cobalt since earlier this year. It announced at the weekend that it was extending that ban through until September. Prices have actually been moderated recently, and so the DRC is trying to push prices up again. But this is bad news for mining companies that are obviously trying to extract cobalt and have it processed in different parts of the world, particularly in China. But so far, the impact of the ban has been limited because many of these mining companies, as is mentioned in the piece, Glencore, actually have a number of supplies outside the country, and so they've been able to fulfill contracts so far, but that will change later on this year if the export ban remains in place.
I want to look at Moscow now, and this piece that's coming out of the Moscow Times. It's talking about how new data exposes Putin's struggle to attract global South investment. What's the meat of that?
Yeah, so there's been a surprising amount of resilience to the Russian economy since its expanded war against Ukraine started in 2022. It has been exceptionally resilient, you could argue, as a consequence of being able to depend on trade allies in the global south, particularly China and India. And it's worked very hard to try and increase its standing in the global south, including parts of Latin America, to try and balance the impact of the sanctions that have been imposed on it by the West. But this piece by the Moscow Times is drawing attention to the limitations of that effort to draw closer to the global south and attract investment. It notes the fact that very few international leaders, business people or politicians attended a recent investment economic forum in St. Petersburg. There was one head of state there, the president of Indonesia. And it also makes the point that levels of foreign direct investment into Russia, as recorded by the UN Conference on Trade and Development, are down very sharply, indeed 91% in 2024 compared to 2021, and that's the lowest level since 2001. And it notes the fact that there are a number of regulatory and geopolitical factors that are preventing more investment into Russia by the global south.
Now, judging by your glowing skin and unlined mouth, you are not a smoker, as I am. And this is a story from The Guardian. It's talking about how vapes are threatening to undo gains in tackling dangers of tobacco.
Yes, there was just a World Conference on Tobacco Control in Dublin, where the WHO and other health officials have discussed the growing use of vapes and e-cigarettes and other sort of more innovative tobacco products, including nicotine pouches, and expressed concern about the fact that they are, in many countries, freely available, and there are not often warnings on the packets of these products as there are on cigarette packets in many countries. So it's calling for an extension in the use of graphic health warnings to cover these other sort of more modern tobacco products, which are increasingly in use, particularly among young people. It's estimated that 6% of children aged 13 to 15 actually use e-cigarettes. And I didn't realise, but there are an astonishing number of countries actually where there are no restrictions at all or warnings against using tobacco products on even cigarette packets. So yes, the WHO is calling for more action to raise awareness of the dangers associated with tobacco products.
And of course, I think one of the problems is that they come in very child-friendly flavours, don't they? You can get all sorts of flavours.
Absolutely. Very appealing, yes.
Yeah. One of which is mango-flavoured vapes, which takes us neatly onto our last story, which is about the big mango crisis that's going on.
It's mango season, yes. Anyone who's ever had the delicious mangoes that come from South Asia at this time of year will understand what this article in the New York Times is about. It's describing the frenzied interest in securing mangoes fresh from South Asia, particularly from India in this case, which of course have come a very long way if you're sitting in New York. This article is about the business in New York involved in bringing mangoes over. It describes the business as brutal. The windows to sell them vanishingly short, customers finicky, profit margins are slim, competition ruthless. And yet there is an insatiable demand for these mangoes, partly because they sort of bring back childhood memories for people who grew up in India, who are missing India, and who will pay an enormous amount of money for mangoes that have been flown from the other side of the world. One customer who's interested in buying Indian mangoes says if you buy an Indian mango as opposed to a mango from somewhere else, and most mangoes in the US are actually imported from Mexico. But if you buy one from India, it's like buying a BMW versus buying a Honda Accord. I don't even look at the prices. And another buyer acknowledges it's not a rational purchase.
I completely agree. They are totally delicious. And the season is so short. We nip down to Southall to get them from there because they are just wonderful.
Yes, there's nothing quite like a fresh Indian mango.
Claudine Fry, thank you very much indeed. Claudine's a partner at Control Risks. This is Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Waves of Russian missile and drone strikes hit Kyiv and Odessa overnight, killing at least 13 people and injuring dozens. The attack came just days after one of the deadliest barrages on Kyiv and on the eve of the Nato Summit. It follows an attack by the Ukrainian military on an oil depot in Russia's southern Rostov region, used to supply Russian forces in occupied parts of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a new defence co-production initiative on Monday during a short visit by the Ukrainian president to London. The agreement, which covers the next 3 years, is to share battlefield technology that will boost Ukraine's drone production and link up Britain's defence industry with the technology being developed on the front lines in Ukraine. And China is urging people to avoid extreme eating shows online, calling them wasteful and unhealthy. Despite past crackdowns, the videos still get millions of views, showing people eating huge amounts of food and very spicy dishes. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It is 13:35 in Phnom Penh and 7:35 here in London. A border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand has escalated into a trade war. The crisis began in late May when a Cambodian soldier was killed at the border, then dramatically worsened when Cambodia's former Prime Minister Hun Sen leaked his private phone call with Thai Prime Minister Shinawatra. Cambodia has imposed escalating sanctions, banning Thai films, vegetables, and finally cutting off fuel imports on June the 23rd. Well, I'm joined now by Deethsok Udom, who is Professor of International Relations, Paragon International University in Cambodia. Many thanks for joining us. What is currently happening? What kind of economic sanctions are the two countries imposing on each other?
Good afternoon from Phnom Penh. Thank you for having me. A lot is happening right now. You kind of almost have to follow the news minute by the minute because there are lots of development. A lot of it has to do with posturing and tit-for-tat retaliation. So I just want to clarify a point that from the Cambodian official position, everything that Cambodia has done so far is always in response to Thailand's threat or impose, let's say, unilateral border closure. So, for example, this morning, Thailand actually closed the border for most of the borders, and Cambodia actually responded by closing all the borders, only allowing Cambodian returnees to the country. And so, essentially, right now, everything is blocked, except for Thailand, they accept only Cambodian medical people who seek medical treatment in Thailand and some students.
I wonder if you could tell us how this has escalated from the May military clash all the way up to the situation now.
Sure. So it started off with the deadly clash that resulted in the death of one Cambodian soldier. At the beginning, there was some attempt to actually reconcile the situation, calming the borders and whatnot. But unfortunately, the evolving situation in Thailand, especially the domestic issues, sort of pushed the situation to the point that Cambodia became frustrated because there was no fruitful negotiation. The Cambodian government views this issue as not being able to have sound discussion because the civilian government in Thailand says something, but the military say something else. And so, for example, when Cambodia retaliated, even at this point now, the condition is simply this. The Thai military closed the border, so all Cambodians will actually retaliate. And once the Thai military agrees to open the border, Cambodia will actually follow suit. But Cambodia does not engage in negotiation because it says that Thailand took the first action, so it's just retaliating. But yes, throughout the weeks, we've seen that sometimes, for example, let's say when opposition figures in Thailand say, well, Cambodia should suffer because they are actually having conflict with us. So some of the opposition members suggested that oil and fuel should be cut, should not be imported to Cambodia or exported to Cambodia. And that's how the Cambodian government retaliates. They say, well, we are not going to wait for you to decide whether to cut or not. We're just going to cut the supply ourselves because we are not entirely dependent on Thailand alone. We have other sources. And so everything so far has been sort of a tit-for-tat retaliation. Every time Thailand says something, even if it's not an official line, Cambodia generally responded by sort of showing to the people that Cambodia has the upper hand in all of this.
I wonder how this dispute then is going to affect the stability of the entire ASEAN region.
Well, for one, it shows that unless ASEAN is going to be able to do something meaningful, ASEAN itself will lose credibility in the region because it forget about trying to solve other bigger problems. Because if two members are engaged in escalating tension and it's not able to step in and resolve it, then the ASEAN centrality and the preaching about ASEAN, for example, recently all 10 member states adopted the ASEAN Shared Future 2045, where they're all saying that we'll be living together peacefully for prosperous as ASEAN and adhering to all international law, non-violence and things like that. But the preaching is different, but they're not walking the talk.
Dear Sok Udam, Professor of International Relations at Paragon International University, Cambodia, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist. Europe's defence firms are in the throes of a boom moment as national budgets are bolstered and militaries readied for action. But there's a vital shortfall. The continent's supply of TNT, the explosive that goes into every missile and every grenade, is currently provided by a single factory in Poland, with the rest imported from Southeast Asia. But there are plans to plug the gap. Monocle's executive editor Chris Lord caught up with Joachim Herblum, who's co-founder and CEO of Sweebel, a startup that's just secured a €3 million investment to open a new explosives factory in Sweden. Chris began by asking Joachim about the current state of TNT production in Europe.
So before 2022 and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we have one production plant of TNT in Europe, being in Poland. And all of the major European producers were happy with the volume they were allocated from the factory in Poland. Suddenly, fast forward into 2022, the war breaks out in full scale, and Ursula von der Leyen and all of the European member nations say, hey, we need to scale up capacity to be able to have a deterrent effect towards Russia. And suddenly, the volume produced in Poland is not enough, and that ends up with a very long-distance import dependency, primarily from Southeast Asia.
So it's coming from Southeast Asia in terms of because the current supply from Poland is overstretched. What do you propose here? What have you got in mind for Sweebel and how you can help to sort of bring that resilience back home?
So let's start with the numbers. It was presented in March of this year in a British study that Russia has capacity to make ready more than 5 million artillery shells per annum. The same study presented that the European capacity was just north of 700,000. Fast calculation, it takes Russia 2 months to produce the annual capacity of Europe. And then going into the NATO strategy of deterrence, the longer time that passes when you have this difference in production value, the higher the risk of a military conflict in Europe. So in order to be able to mitigate that, we need to be almost on par with Russian production capacity. And right now we have 1/6 of the Russian capacity.
Because this is the missing piece, isn't it? We've seen governments all over Europe, for the first time in some cases for many years, increase their defence budgets quite substantially. There's also more and more funds available. There are more and more interest. There's more and more interest from venture capital, from funds that would typically go to tech startups, now looking at defence firms. The challenge that we've got is, as you observe, Europe's on the back foot, isn't it? We're just almost a bit too late to the game. Is this a bit too late to the game?
Well, we should all be very grateful for the sacrifices made by Ukraine to give us some space to actually react to what's happening. But even if we do, the game is not fair. Russia do not care for environmental permits before they raise a new factory. Russia do basically not care for the loss of life. So we are comparing apples to pears, and we're going into a battle on very unfair terms. So it's of the utmost essence that a lot of us across industries collaborate to close the production capacity gap as soon as possible.
I believe the end of 2027 is when you're looking to get this operational and going. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are on time to deliver on that timeline. So we have our final negotiations with the Court of Environment scheduled for the fourth quarter of this year. And that is basically the final permit we need in order to erect the buildings.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? It's like, it's all well and good for the rearming of Europe, but if we're still reliant on materials, which essentially TNT is, and looking to places in Southeast Asia to fulfill that, if we find ourselves, as we saw 5 years ago, which was a pandemic which we were all involved in, forget a war, if we see some kind of conflict that cuts that off, what would that mean, do you think, for Europe's defence industry?
Well, we are having this interview in London, and you guys put an export ban on the COVID vaccines. And that's going to happen whenever there is a conflict in these manufacturing countries as well. So let's say that we do try to buy TNT from Poland. If there will be a political shift or if there will be a military attack on Poland, I guarantee that there will be an export ban on the TNT. So if we want to have any form of resilience and self-sufficiency, we need to produce more locally. And we're talking tens of thousands of metric tons.
You talk about your background in tech and coming to this point. Tell me a little bit about how investors are looking at defence these days and opportunity in that space. Because in the June issue of Monocle, we talked to a lot of defence startups that are kind of, at the moment, embroiled in a kind of huge series of funding rounds. A lot of them say basically anything beyond what they've perceived before. How is that changing? How is the interest in this space changing, do you find?
Well, I think it's a major difference just compared to 12, 18 months ago. So when I started doing this work, I had to do a lot of desk research and explain to the investors why there is an opportunity in the space. Today, it's enough to just turn on your TV. You can see the enormous amounts of money coming in through the Rearm Europe program, 800 billion euros. Just yesterday, I think they actually formally approved the SAFE instrument of 150 billion euros. And there is a condition in the SAFE instrument that 65% of the components should be manufactured within the EU. So you can also see that Europe is trying to get defense production and the related job opportunities into Europe. There is also a financial angle why you cannot rely on long-term imports, because then you cannot utilize the European funding.
That was Joachim Herblum in conversation with Monocle's Chris Lord. And for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
Sound designer Michel Gaubert is a legend in the world of music and fashion. He's responsible for the music of some of the top fashion shows out there, including Chanel. He has a new memoir out called Remixed. It's published by Fayard. Monocle Radio's senior correspondent Fernando Augusto Pacheco sat down with Michel and started by asking him about whether the focus of the book was more personal or professional.
Well, it's true. I mean, the book is both personal, but I mean, it's very hard to dissociate my life, from my work because it's part of me, you know what I mean? So, I mean, music has been a part of me since I was very young, since I was a kid. So it's very hard and I use it to work. So, it's all integrated. The book, I mean, in the beginning, I wasn't sure I wanted to do a book. I mean, I was approached by the publishing company, and I was thinking about it, and because I didn't know which angle I would use to write the book. It's true that a lot of people, they don't, they think, oh my God, Michel Gaubert does, music for runway shows or soundtracks or whatever, and they don't know why it goes that way. You think, oh my God, it's just like playing music, but it's not. So I wanted to explain to people, a bit who I am, where all my inspiration came from, how I start to like music, learn music, about music. So I just wanted to share that with people, in general, because they're curious, and I hope they are.
We're here in London talking to you. You're in Paris right now, but London was quite an interesting, you had quite an early experience here, right? Music-wise.
Oh, yes. Very much. London was my first trips outside of France, and also by myself. We had the parents on top of me. It's not, I didn't like my parents or anything like that, but it was more like I was more left to myself. So, it was easier for me to get lost in music and, and the pop world. So London was very important, very, very important to me. In the beginning, at least it was, yes, because it opened doors for me and it showed me that music was different, and perception of things were different also. It's not just music, it's like that was given another option how to look at the world,
I have a question for you. I know you had a deep connection with Karl Lagerfeld. You met him even before Chanel and everything. And so tell us, was it your kind of start point in the fashion world after when you meet Karl? Was that one of the kind of defining moves to you?
Yes. I was working on shows before Karl, but they were they were smaller, independent, shows and I was doing that as a side gig because I was working in the record stores. So, and the day that, they came to the store and asked me if I wanted to do music for them, I said, okay, well, sure. I said yes, because I'm always ready for a new project. And then I was like, okay, now I have to do it, It was one step above of everything I was doing, It was like to me, oh my God, I got to get my stuff together, because it has to be impeccable.
Did you and Karl had a similar kind of music taste? Did you kind of get on together because you get what I'm trying to show with my music here?
Yeah, it's not, we had a similar, I understood. The thing is, even with most people I work with, I understand their music taste. I understand where they're coming from. From Karl, it was such a strong personality, the music he liked was part of him, I think we got along because we had a good connection, and he was he understood where I was coming from. I was bringing him things he might have known, that was a bit outside of his radar. I was more into music than he was. It was my job. So he needed me. And from him, I discovered music I didn't really know. He liked a lot of Italian music that I didn't know really well. He liked classical music. He turned me on to a lot of classical music, and also a way of looking at things. He looked at things differently than me, and so did I. But together, we were complementary. And that was very interesting because he was, I guess, interested enough in discovering what I had to say, and I was also very interested in what I had to say. It was just not me for me and him for him. It was like really sharing. And I would say that most people I work with, that's when it's the best, because it's when you share ideas, when you share things. That's why I like to call it a collaboration. It's like an encounter of culture, and that's when to me, that's when it's the most interesting.
Because I presume, of course, you choose the music and the vibe after you've seen the clothes, right? So it has to be kind of very Michel Gaubert, the music, but also kind of associated with the clothes and what the collection is about, right?
Okay, the collection is one thing. Of course, that's important because the fashion show is all about showing the collection. But nowadays, I think it's changed a little bit. A show is more about a mood, like an idea you want to convey, so you bring out the clothes, but the clothes are part of a bigger realm, like the clothes are also part of where we stand in time, it's the expression of fashion is also a reflection of what's going on around us, so it's, and there's lots of things happening at the moment.
Sound designer Michel Gaubert there, speaking to Monocle Radio senior correspondent Fernando Augusto Pacheco. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And now I'm joined by Brenda Tui, who's Monocle's luxury markets editor. Good morning to you, Brenda.
Good morning, Georgina.
You have been on your travels. I've been tracking you enviously on Instagram. Where have you been?
I have been in Las Vegas. It was fantastic. So much fun. I mean, I think everybody goes there just to have fun. So it's very upbeat. I guess if you're losing maybe at the tables, it's not so much fun. But I don't get involved with that.
And what's in Las Vegas for the luxury market lover like you?
Well, I stay at the Wynn Resort, and it is really luxurious. I mean, I kind of have 2-hour breakfast eating blueberry pancakes or maybe soft-boiled eggs and caviar. I mean, it's just fabulous. It's huge and just full of the wildest, most fabulous-looking people. I mean, I think there are also 52 shops, so you never need to leave the Wynn, really.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the Wynn has got a new Middle East project, hasn't it? Tell us about that.
Yes. They are opening a 1,500-room resort with a casino in Ras Al Khaimah in the United Arab Emirates. It's not going to open until March 2027, but it's being built as we speak. And I was chatting with their chief brand officer, Michael Weaver, last week, who said that in addition to the hotel, they're also building a village for their 4,500 members of staff who will come to work there. So it's quite a huge project. That little village will have restaurants and cinemas and whatnot. So it sounds very contained.
It's always a huge problem, isn't it? Right, we find that in the Hamptons, where you can have the biggest, nicest house or hotel or whatever, but there's nowhere for staff to live. It's extraordinary. It's really something that does need to be thought through. Listen, you went to the most fabulous party, didn't you?
Oh, wow. It was amazing. Audemars Piguet are celebrating 150 years in business, and they had the most fabulous party at 180 Strand a couple of days ago. It was wonderful. Mark Ronson and Ray, who are both Audemars Piguet ambassadors, composed a song called Suzanne, which they played. It had its first rendition there that very night. Ilaria Resta, the CEO of Audemars Piguet, was the master of ceremony, and she just was incredibly wonderful. She said how singing and music were always a part of Audemars Piguet and their watchmaking, that in the early days, 150 years ago, let's say, that the watchmakers were singing. They were singing as they created the timepieces. So steeped in a history of music, Audemars Piguet continues by sponsoring the Montreux Jazz Festival, and then they have a parallel festival called Parallel, which champions work and music by new artists.
Excellent. Let's wind up with LVMH, who've won the Luxury Grand Prix at Cannes Lions for their Olympic campaign, a campaign that was essentially not there.
It was so clever the way they were able to circumvent the ban on actual advertising at the Olympic event. So, Louis Vuitton, they made little trunks and trays, logo trays and trunks. Chaumet made the fabulous Olympic medals, the gold, silver, and bronze. Berluti created the wardrobe, the sports wardrobe. And of course, Christian Dior was there to dress Celine Dion and Lady Gaga.
It sounds absolutely gorgeous. I mean, we know it looked wonderful, but the way that they've sort of managed to make this happen and turn it
so clever.
So clever. Finally, quick look at Tiffany.
Yes, well, LVMH purchased Tiffany recently. They felt it was like a sleeping beauty. Really, because of the work of their fabulous designer, Jean Schlumberger, who created all of the iconic Tiffany pieces, the bird on the rock, to name really the best, most iconic piece, which was bought for Jackie Kennedy, Elizabeth Taylor, the Rockefellers, whoever, everybody had a fabulous bird on a rock. But they have such a history that had kind of been, ignored for a while. So LVMH intends to bring Tiffany back up again to sit with the high jewellery group.
Excellent. Brenda, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Brenda Tui is Monocle's luxury markets editor. And that's all for this programme. Many thanks to you, Brenda, the gold medalist of colleagues, and actually a host of fantastic women on the show today, including our producers, Laura Kramer, Anita Riotta and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Hunter Wang. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and then we'll cross to our Paris studio, where Emma Nelson will give you the briefing at midday in London. I'll be back on The Globalist tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.